Welcome to Veritas Group's webinar, Rethinking Fundraising, Strategies for Nonprofits Beyond Events and Membership. And I'm Jeff Schreifels, and I'm principal of Veritas Group. And I'm working here with Matt Gill, who's a client experience leader here with us at Veritas. And Matt, this is our first time together doing a webinar, the two of us. All right. So because of the number of participants today, we won't be able to take your questions out loud. So please type them into the chat or question box. And if you can put them in the question box, that'd be easier because Matt's going to be looking at the questions. At the end of the presentation, we should have plenty of time to be able to take those questions. Those are usually the most fun part of these webinars. But he will be able to do that. And at the end of the presentation, we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. And just so you know, we'll be sending you a link to a recording of this webinar and copy of the slide deck tomorrow. So with that said, let me introduce myself again. I'm Jeff Schreifels, principal of Veritas Group. I've been doing this a long time, over 30 years. And I absolutely love what I get to do every day. And part of that is creating content about mid, major, and planned giving to help all of us do this work a little bit better. So today I'm excited because this is a brand new webinar that we've put together, and I think it's going to be really exciting. So Matt, how about you?
Well, happy to be here. I'm a client experience leader with Veritas Group. Been here for a couple of years now. Background in fundraising and major gifts, major gift leadership, also in the Navy, still working in the Navy Reserves from time to time. Coming at you from Minnesota. And years ago, I was a client of Veritas. So I went through the training and the coaching, and it was really integral in my own growth as a fundraiser myself. So happy to be on this side of the house.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today, Matt. This is going to be fun. Okay, now before we get started on today's workshop, I just wanted to share a little bit about who we are at Veritas. And some of you on the call may be pretty familiar with us, but for those who aren't, we are passionately relationship-focused and grounded in a data-driven approach. And this dynamic is critical to the system, structure, and strategy that we have found to be successful in mid, major, and planned giving programs. You know, something that Richard and I recognized during our time in the direct response world is that data is powerful. So when we found that most major gift programs were missing this critical piece, we knew that the data had to drive our strategy and approach. And over the last decade, we've had the opportunity to work with thousands of major gift officers, mid-level officers, and planned giving officers, many on a weekly basis through our consulting work. So we know firsthand how this approach has helped organizations of all sizes and focuses to create authentic donor relationships that lead to a stronger donor pipeline and greater net revenue. Also, the lack of data was really concerning to us, and it still amazes us how many nonprofits do not adequately consider the data piece of this work. And that's why we've worked so hard to ground our approach in an objective fact, not our personal opinion. We've formed our recommendations through insight from analysis of millions of donor records and work with thousands of fundraisers and leaders. And we've gotten to work with some pretty phenomenal organizations over the years who have helped us learn and develop our strategy and approach. We believe there is a huge untapped potential for major donors, but a lot of time we don't see it because we've created obstacles that get in the way of our donors fulfilling their philanthropic interests. So, with all of that in mind, our promise to you is this. If you follow our advice today, you'll break down some obstacles that are stopping you from having transformational relationships with your donors so that you can partner together to make an even greater impact on your mission. We've had the opportunity to work with some incredible partners, including American Cancer Society, United Way, and Greater Public, to shift their mindset around the fundraising strategy so that we could create a culture where donors are seen as true partners in this work.
Now, talking about obstacles, Jeff, a big part of what gets in the way of developing better relationships with major donors is that you and your organization might be stuck in a transactional giving mindset. Now, let's uncover what a transactional mindset is, and kind of to see how it shows up in your work. We're going to do a quick exercise. Get your typing fingers out, and in the chat right now, just drop a little comment about how your organization could get into a transactional mindset, or how it has in the past. You don't need to call anybody out or get yourself into trouble, but for example, requiring fundraisers to send out a report to every donor, regardless of the donor's preferences or their interests, or if you have maybe slow gift processing that will delay the thank you process. So drop some of those things in the chat, and let's see what comes up. Most communication is about fundraising. Check off boxes. Seeing some come in, trying to capture them as they're coming through. Lots of mail, lots of direct mail, lots of asks. Okay. Pulling fundraisers in a bunch of different directions, I'm seeing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so great stuff, and keep them coming, because a lot of you are going to see, other people are going to say some of the same things that you're saying, and we've seen this a lot, and so a lot of the things that we've seen, we've kind of summarized them here. So the systems in the organization aren't designed to support the donor's journey or treat the donor like a partner. Sometimes the donors are primarily communicated with just about giving money, instead of focus on learning their passions and interests. Their preferences aren't taken into account, and money is pursued as the top priority, which can be, really damaging in the long term. In addition to this, something that ties into the fundraising strategies we'll be talking about today, many organizations will conflate the purpose and intention of certain fundraising strategies or tactics with the overarching philanthropic goals. And I know this is a big point for you, Jeff. So, one that we see all the time with our clients.
Yeah, that's right. And this is something I'm really passionate about as a result. Here's what this looks like. So organizations that take fundraising strategies or tactics like events, membership, corporate giving, and making those into standalone departments. Leadership, creating metrics and KPIs that don't support allowing the donor to move through the major gift pipeline, and developing an organizational structure that isn't aligned with the donor pipeline, so that donors are getting stuck along the way and they're really not allowed to fulfill their own potential.
So important points, Jeff. And as we move forward through this hour, we'll be diving into more of that in the presentation. Now, staying in this kind of a transactional mindset can have really devastating effects on your organization, your relationship with your donor. And while we do this, we're likely to see these kinds of things if we don't move into a more relationship-focused fundraising approach. You can get some large gifts, and they'll come in, but the donor won't feel honored or seen as a partner, and so you struggle to build that long-term relationship. Or the donor won't hear how they're making a difference, and they'll stop giving. And this will all manifest in minimal or stagnant growth because you're not properly nurturing your donor relationships. And a significant issue that arises when you're stuck in this transactional approach is exactly what Jeff mentioned a moment ago. You start to have clogs in your donor pipeline, and donors aren't moving into higher or more transformational levels of giving. They're stuck in their renewal. So what does it look like when you move into a more relationship-focused strategy where you're treating your donors like partners? Well, you honor your donors' inclination, their communication preferences, their passions and interests through your strategy and the communication you have with your donor. And you regularly report back on the impact of the donor's giving. And you regularly take the opportunity to celebrate the donor. You see the donor as part of the greater community that's coming together to achieve your mission. And they're a partner in the work, and you treat them as such. And then internally, when you're relationship focused, you don't really have unhealthy competition or silos. Everyone internally, as well as the donor, are working together to further the mission and doing it as part of the community.
Yep. So, in all of our years of working with nonprofits around the world, there are three common strategies that we see that keep organizations stuck in a transactional mindset. First, events-based fundraising. Another is membership programs. And the last one is corporate or workplace giving programs. Now, I want to be clear. We're not against any one of these strategies. They all play a valuable role in the overall fundraising efforts. Problems arise, though, when we stop thinking of this as they relate to the donor pipeline. Here's an example. When you stop looking at membership programs as a donor acquisition tactic and it becomes its own department functioning outside of the pipeline, or when events are treated as the most important fundraising effort at your organization, taking up months of time from across the department, when in reality, they're probably getting a 2-to-1, maybe 3-to-1 ROI if you're lucky. Major gifts, by comparison, is easily at 6, 8, 12, 20-to-1 or higher. So you have a strategy that should be serving the ultimate goal of moving donors through the pipeline and generating more transformational giving that has become an end in and of itself. All right, so let's dive first into the events and talk a little bit more about how these get off track and end up making you stuck in a transactional mindset. Often when an organization decides to put on a big event, the entire team gets pulled into it. You have major gift officers responsible for event teardown, MGOs managing raffles, fundraisers doing airport runs, and it all takes the team away from working with their donors. Part of this is that we've forgotten the function and purpose of events. Events are not major gifts. Let me say that again. Events are not major gifts. They can have a role in a major gifts communication strategy if appropriate, but events are ultimately a marketing tactic. They build brand awareness and can be a valuable acquisition tool. They can also deepen your donor's connection to the organization and be a cultivation tool, but that has to be done strategically and within the specific donor in mind. Oftentimes, however, many nonprofits get so entrenched in an event or events, they've created a whole team of people to run them. Now, that's fine, but only if they're not evaluated on bringing in more and more revenue from that event each year. What we have seen happen is that the events team now believes it has their donors and the individual fundraising team has their donors. I've been in situations where a major gift officer will be asked not to solicit their donors around the time of the event so that the event team can get those donors to buy a table and count that as revenue for their team. So instead of being donor-centered and concerned about the donor's passions and interests, we have moved to be organizationally focused or making sure the event is profitable for the event team. You see how messed up that is, right? We've lost sight about what fundraising is about. I highly recommend getting a real and honest view of your event strategy and where it currently slots into your overall fundraising approach. Here are some questions we ask as we evaluate this with them. How much net revenue is this event actually bringing in? Note that I'm talking about the net here. That means you need to accurately and thoroughly track expenses, which many nonprofits don't do. And that includes the amount of time also required from every single team member involved. We talk to a lot of organizations that only ever look at the gross revenue of an event. So the event grosses $500,000, and that sounds great until you figure out that it costs $450,000 and 8 months of work to execute. Once you have a clear and honest picture of your net revenue, ask your team how their time and the organization's resources could be better spent. Doesn't mean that you aren't going to do the event. It just means you're rebalancing to ensure your time and resources are being used wisely and effectively. And the last question is, what is the actual purpose of the event? Get really clear on this from your entire team. You may have to educate others, including your board, on this topic as well, but it's vital that everyone understand the purpose. The next strategy that comes up especially for organizations like public media stations, zoos, performing art venues, is membership. The current model we see in a lot of organizations is this overabundant focus on increasing the number of members in the membership program and membership renewal. That's what all the KPIs are focused on, rather than moving donors through membership into other areas of giving or in addition to membership. Membership is another area where this fundraising tactic can take on a life of its own, often becoming its own department rather than a tool to acquire, cultivate, and move more donors through the donor pipeline. In fact, I've been to some nonprofits where they physically have membership in a separate area of the building than philanthropy, forgetting that membership is a tactic or strategy of philanthropy. Now, the last of these three strategies is corporate or workplace giving programs. We've heard of a number of organizations of all different sizes that are incredibly dependent on this sort of giving. This puts you in a very vulnerable place because if a corporate donor or workplace giving donor leaves, there's nothing to fill in that gap. We've worked with a variety of organizations that have robust workplace giving programs, and here are some of the common challenges that keep you stuck in a transactional approach. They're training the donor to associate their giving with their company rather than developing a strong, meaningful relationship with the organization. You're training the donor that you only need their gift during the campaign season rather than presenting them with opportunities to give throughout the year that are aligned with their passions and interests. And the donor isn't well educated in what your organization does or how their gift is making a difference. And there may be delays in getting information to your donors, or they may not get much information at all. As a result of all this, the donor is not meaningfully connected to your organization and what you do. Now, we didn't want to leave you just with this transactional view of all the three strategies because they could serve you as valuable tactics in a relational fundraising approach. As long as they're serving the ultimate goal of philanthropy, they can be a great strategy to employ. So, what can events do? Well, they can be a valuable tool for marketing and public relations that help you build brand awareness and trust. They can also be a great donor acquisition tool. Where appropriate and aligned with the donor's passion and interests, they can also be a useful tactic to cultivate the donor. And they can be a great opportunity to strengthen and support your programs and mission. Leveraging your events from a major gifts perspective focuses on the donor and how to deepen the donor relationship. You may use the event to cultivate the donor towards a major gift ask and connect the donor emotionally to the problem you're working to solve. Now, when it comes to membership programs, these are a great donor acquisition tactic that can help you create a pool of donors to move into your mid-level program and to qualifying for major gifts. The important thing here is to start broadening the donor's view about how you can partner together and why you need their support. Get them thinking beyond the membership itself. When we work with clients with membership programs, here's how we do that. We start by providing value that is aligned to the donor's passions and interests through a structured qualification process or through a relational mid-level program. For donors that are qualified and move to major gifts, the gift officer will build a communication plan that is focused on deepening the donor's relationship with the organization. You will, as part of that plan, prepare a donor offer that connects the donor's passions and interests to your mission. This is a critical part in expanding the donor's view of how you can partner together, and it helps them see beyond their membership. Now, the donor may not be yet ready to move out of their regular membership, so you still want them to have that information be handy, and you'll continue working to broaden the donor's perspective and to build deeper individual relationships with your donor. So here's an example of what that movement from membership to major gifts look like. So you can have a member who's giving $1,000 a year, and that's what they're doing as their membership level. But then you can go to that donor and ask them for another gift, in this case, $50,000 gift. We've seen this over and over again when you're really looking at membership as part of the overall program, not as the program. And so you have members who are just used to giving that regular gift, whether it's 1,000 or 5,000 at every renewal cycle. But then beyond that, when you start talking to them and relating what their passion and interests are to what all you're doing, that's when you start seeing bigger gifts. So that's something to consider. So corporate and workplace giving is, again, a great donor acquisition tool, but it can be a bit more challenging to convert these donors because their initial motivation is not always related to interest and passion for the organization's work. With workplace givers, you need to recognize that your rate of qualification is likely going to be lower. Typically, we see an average of 1 in 3 donors being qualified. This is not likely going to be the case for a workplace giving donor. It could be 1 in 5, 1 in 6, even higher. You also look at different goals in qualifying workplace givers. Here, success is identifying which donors want to be mission donors and which are just happy to remain workplace givers. So here's what we recommend to one client that helped them to create a structured rhythm that gave their workplace giving donors a chance to be educated, engage, and identify which donors were interested in becoming a mission donor. So you can see there's like 7 touches here, really to find out what is this donor really interested in.
And we'll come back to those 7 touches, Jeff, in just a minute, because our goal with any of our fundraising strategies is that it would support and integrate into a relationship-focused approach so that the donor remains the focus of your efforts. And so all these tactics are kept in balance and in service to the overarching goal of major gifts, which is, remember, the purpose, the goal, the ultimate aim of major gifts is to secure funds for program and fulfill the donor's passions and interests. That doesn't mean they're driving your programming, but it does mean that there's these twin goals. And so your structure has to be created to support these dual purposes at all times, and you got to keep it in balance. If you only focus on one or the other, it's going to, the other side will suffer. The other aspect to keep in mind related to how the structure works is that a donor has to be delivering net revenue. So this takes into account the cost of staff time and travel and recognition to manage the donor. So that you're ensuring every donor is achieving the purpose of securing funds for program. In other words, the cost to serve a donor needs to be less than the revenue that the donor gives. And Jeff mentioned earlier 6 or 8 times less in a healthy major gift program. So let's get started with understanding the major gift system that we've been using for more than a decade and have proven through our work with hundreds of nonprofit organizations. This chart is an illustration of our approach to major gifts. Each piece of this process has been developed and improved using data and a focus on the donor. Now, take a minute to look at it. It is an engineering marvel. Take a minute to look at it, but let's get into each of these components a little further. Imagine how different your life would be if every donor on your caseload would communicate back with you at some level. Mm-hmm. When this is true, you can learn their interests, you can learn their passions, you can learn their communication preferences, you can invite them to events and engage in tours, and you can tell them how they made a difference in very specific and meaningful ways. You will also spend your time having interesting conversations with donors, not hitting your head against the wall, trying to get 100 people to actually respond to you. That is defeating. But our goal is to, with our qualification cycle, is to build trust and ask if donors want a more personal relationship with the organization. In each step, you're working to show the donor that you care about their passions and interests, you want to know how to communicate with them in their preferred manner, and that you're not just after their money. We designed our qualification cycle pulling from some of the best practices in the sales world, which typically recommend 7 to 9 touches to get a prospect to engage. And each step in our cycle is meant to provide different ways for you to engage and connect with donors while trying to learn more about donors' communication preferences and interests. And you saw, the modified version Jeff was talking about when he was talking workplace giving. This is what you're seeing right now, the tried and true method to qualify donors to your caseload. So here's an idea of how this pacing maybe works. So the first week, you start by sending 20 introduction letters. Then things continue to build as those 20 move from step to step. So the next week, you're following up on those introduction letters while preparing the next 20, and things continue to build each step of the way. And you reach kind of this peak point where it feels like you have donors at every stage of qualification, but you get through that as you're qualifying donors to your caseload, and you stay organized using what our donor engagement plan, which we use to create individual goals and plans for our donors, but also to track this process and to stay organized here. So the key to this is we want to keep our word with the donor. So life happens. If this becomes delayed, you end up pausing at a point where you can catch up. So your introduction letter will say, "You'll hear from me soon." You want to make sure you do follow up on that so that they do hear from you soon. But there's flexibility here to pause when you need to and get yourself caught up, get yourself organized again. But after about 6 to 8 months, if you've got no qualified donors to start with, 6 to 8 months later, you should hit 150 qualified donors on your caseload. And after that, you'll still do some of this qualification during the year in smaller groups as you manage kind of the natural transitions of your caseload.
Yep.
And once you have this qualified caseload, there's a few things that we want you to do. So tiering your donors, valuable strategy for managing your time and keeping you focused. So remember, you only have so much time, and if you don't know where to focus, it's easy to get pulled in lots of directions, but wrong directions too. So it's important to note here, we've got tiers A, B, and C. They can be fluid. If someone is initially tiered at tier B, you find out something that indicates they should be in tier A, you can move them. That's fine. This part of the structure is very flexible, and it adjusts as you learn more about each donor in the caseload. And this chart you're seeing, standardized overview of how we would tier a major gift caseload, and we use the same concept. Slightly different tax, the same concept in mid-level and plan giving as well. And the idea is you have the fewest number of donors in tier A, but that's where you're spending the most time with your personal strategic moves. Doesn't mean that you're not spending time with your tier C donors, and your tier C donors probably shouldn't know that they are your tier C donors, but that your efforts are weighted towards the donors who are most inclined to your mission and who have the greatest capacity. We also create goals for each individual donor on the caseload. And this ensures you're keeping a relationship-focused approach and honoring what's going on with each donor. When you do like a one-size-fits-all approach, maybe a percent increase across the whole caseload, that only reinforces a transactional mindset, a transactional approach to fundraising. And it doesn't treat the donors as individuals with lives that extend beyond the organization or extend beyond the gift. And in this example, so you can see there's a note for one donor that their business is hurting. So the goal is actually down year over year. There's other notes in there that allow leadership to understand and prepare for the changes that will occur. And two other features of goal setting that we couldn't show in this graphic, but are kind of part of the strategy as you're looking at goals. And the first is goals should be cash flow. So when you look at when the donor typically gives each year, use that as your guide for when you expect them to give again. And you may know certain information about a change in the donor's life, like selling a business, that could impact when the gift will be received. And we also recommend that fundraisers set aspirational goals for their donors on their caseload. So not goals that you're going to share with leadership necessarily or budget off of, but your above and beyond wishes for your donors. If everything lines up with the donor's interest and opportunity to support the organization's programs, that would be what you're working towards throughout the years, that aspirational goal. So plan for every donor, right? In our approach, we've also, we've got these individualized communication plans, and they should be anchored in what you expect, when you expect to ask for the gift, and then you fill in with cultivation touch points, impact reporting, engagement oriented around the donor's passion and interest. So we got Paul here, we've got Betty. There's different passions, different interests, and a bespoke plan built to support each of them. And when it comes to planning, you can think of a lot of different types of touch points to choose from, but it can sound overwhelming. But once you mark out when you're asking for a gift, you fill in some YMADs, we call them, some impact reporting. You plan will fill up pretty quickly, and we teach fundraisers how to develop a variety of touch points. And you can see examples here of different kinds of touch points that make it more meaningful and interesting for the donor.
Yep.
And this is a pretty disciplined approach, right? Those plans, a different plan for each donor. That's a lot. You're moving in a lot of different directions, but that disciplined approach to major gifts is vital. Some people push back. They say, "I'm a free spirit. Don't fence me in with these rigid plans, man." No, we're saying we don't want your donor to be at the whim of your free spirit. The reality is you only have so much time, and you need to steward that time wisely so you're focusing the right amount of time and energy on the right donors. So this disciplined and structured approach helps you maintain focus. You know exactly what you need to do and the direction you're going with each donor. And I think we've all had situations where we're just being reactive with our caseloads. And when you're in that space, it's easy for too much time to pass between communications with a key donor, or for certain touch points to just fall by the wayside. And when you have a plan and a strategy, you stay on track, and it helps you build the kind of relationships that lead to transformational gifts.
Thanks, Matt, for joining me today. Wow, that was some good stuff. So let me ask you that are listening today, if we offered you an opportunity to learn specifically how to implement that strategy that Matt just went through and to help focus on meaningful donor partnerships, would you be interested? Let me see you raise your hands. Okay, yes, I see a number of people raising their hands. Well, our next offering of the certification courses for major gift fundraisers and fundraising leaders starts on April 22nd. And these courses really have it all and will provide a comprehensive training on the system and structure you can implement to not just create a qualified caseload, but manage your caseload and create meaningful relationships with your donors in an effective way. And our course for fundraising leaders gives you all the tools and resources you need to successfully manage your major gift program and support the fundraisers on your team. Here's just a note from a Veritas Group alumna about the value of this information and how it helped her raise more money for her organization. Basically, what Suzanne is saying is that going through VGA has helped her not only create a system and structure that she can rely on, it continues to help her stay focused on the mission of her organization. Now, if you're looking to grow your major gift program or take your work with donors to the next level, this really is a course you don't want to miss. And if you want to get the $200 off our upcoming course, which starts on April 22nd, go to veritasgroup.com/courses and select certification courses for major gift fundraisers or certification course for managers and executives, and use the coupon code GIFTS2024 APR on the registration page. So now, Matt, this is a great time to take questions. And
Yeah, so
the Q&A, look in the chat. Let's start taking some of the questions we have from folks.
I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat, and please use the Q&A box as well, so we can be sure to answer as many of your questions as we can get to. A couple of initial questions, Jeff. One about who are the prospects you're qualifying typically? How warm are the prospects? You want to talk a little bit about that, Jeff?
Well, the prospects into a major gift program, typically those are donors who have already given what you would deem as a major gift. So let's just say your major gift program is 5,000 cum and above. So they've given a $5,000 in 1 year or above. Well, that person, in a sense, would be placed in what we call a pool of donors who've given the 5,000 above cum. And from there, you'll qualify. So in other words, you'll reach out to them and with those 7 steps to see if they actually want a relationship with you. Because we know that even when they give a qualifying gift, as far as the amount, only 1 in 3 want that relationship with you. So whatever that number is for your organization, some it could be as low as 500 or 250 if you're a really small organization. Doesn't matter what that number is. Everyone is different based on your size. I mean, universities, Matt, would say 50,000 and above is a major gift. So, or above. So that's where you would start. And that's where you would start the qualifying process.
Speaking of numbers, had a couple of questions on numbers in here. One is, is there a suggested percent of net revenue you'd consider as profitable based on the time and talents invested of the, I think this is events team in this question, and almost a related numbers question is, what amount of revenue should a fully qualified caseload be able to raise?
Okay, let's take the qualified caseload first. So if you're just starting out, you could see like a 2 to 3 to 1 ROI. So for every dollar you're spending, you're getting $3 back in a portfolio for 150 donors. But what you'll want to see over time, and as you're building it, that within 5 years or so, you'll want to see 6, 8 to 1 ROI. So every dollar you're spending, let's say you're spending $100,000 to cultivate that portfolio, you should be making anywhere between $800,000 to $1 million from that portfolio. That would be a good rule of thumb. And you just, but it's different. It depends on what stage of that portfolio is. And so again, if you're just starting the portfolio, 2 to 3 to 1, it'd be a good start. So for every dollar you're spending, you're at least getting $2 or $3 back initially, but then you'll want to grow that quickly. Now, as far as events and the percent, I mean, if I were a development director and I was using events, as we were talking about, as a cultivation tool, as an acquisition tool, if I'm breaking even or making maybe some net revenue from an event, I'm happy. Why? Because I'm using that event not as a moneymaker, but as a way to cultivate my donors and as an acquisition piece. So you have some donors who will be inviting their friends and potentially non-donors to become donors at that event, and then cultivating those new donors post-event. It's really important. But the problem is when events are looked upon as a major source of revenue, so then what happens is all the energy, all the resources get put into that. And then, we made $2 million from that event. Well, okay, we spent $1 million trying to get the 2 million. So you got a 2 to 1. And that's one of your major revenue producers. That's not a great ROI. You can get better ROI sending them direct mail. So it really is looking at what is the purpose of your event? What are you trying to do with it?
Couple of versions of the same question, Jeff. I think I'll just read this one because it encapsulates a lot of what I'm seeing in the chat here. So, as a director of development at a small nonprofit, 6 employees, I raised almost $1 million last year, 35% over my goal. Well done.
Yeah,
but
great.
I have to be a jack of all trades. I do the marketing, I do the annual fund, major gifts, endowment, plan gifts, all data entry, and thank you notes, etc. And I know that that etc. you wrote encompasses a lot.
Yeah.
The boss, the executive director, has never done any fundraising. How do I convince my boss and board that I could do so much more with help and by removing some items from my plate?
That's a great one. And just so you know, I was in your shoes too. When I first started fundraising, I was in an organization that was like a $2 million organization. That was it. I was doing it all as well. So I know exactly what you meant. And here's what I did to convince my boss. I showed my boss all the revenue sources, how much of my time I'm spending on this. And then I said, if I could spend 40% more of my time around major gifts and plan giving and bring someone in to handle the direct response side and events and all the different other things we were doing, we could, over the next 5 years, raise an extra $2 more million. That convinced my boss that we need to invest in it now so that later we could be seeing more net revenue. But and that's how I would approach it. You would have to say, right now, if you're spending, hey, I'm only spending 20% of my time on major gifts. If I could spend 70% of my time, we could have lot more net revenue that would pay way more than it would cost to bring in someone to help. And they would be able to focus on an area that would bring in more revenue. So I think now that you've had this 35% increase and you did it on your own, now's the best time to jump on the goodwill of your CEO and board to ask for more resources for your help. What else have you
Thanks,
seen?
Jeff. Love that. Go ahead. Did I cut you off?
No.
Almost if we keep talking about focusing our time, there's a couple of questions in, how can we create either boundaries around involvement of events or otherwise structure events so that it's making the best use of everyone's time and is accomplishing those relational goals.
Yeah, that is the biggest thing, is looking at this. I would again go back to looking at the sources of your revenue and looking at your top donors. And that's why we always tier our portfolios, because we know that the A-level donors, which in many cases for 150 donors in a portfolio, you're probably talking 15 to 20 donors at the most in your A-level. But they bring in half of the revenue. So do the same kind of tiering on the sources of revenue that you are bringing in from your organization and where that's coming from. And wherever the highest portion of that revenue is, where you're going to be spending more of your time and devoted to. So you might find an event and look at it from a net revenue perspective. So you might have an event, you might have your direct response, your major gift, your plan giving. Look at all those sources of revenue that come in, foundations, government stuff, and look at where you're spending your time on. That is how I would focus and kind of tier the different strategies you're invoking to bring in the revenue. And then wherever that revenue is coming out, that's where I would spend most of my time. On the net revenue side. And I say that because a lot of times in events, you're bringing in a bunch of revenue, but the net revenue is lacking because you're spending so much on the event.
Love that. Digging through a couple of questions around how long would you expect it to take to develop a major gift program for a new member-based organization?
I would say it's going to take at least 24 months to really start seeing it get going. And then you'll start to see past 24 months really start to see the thing take off. But and this is the problem, is that most nonprofit leaders don't seem to have the patience. And it's even longer for plan giving, of course. But I'm telling you, all of those organizations, and I've seen small organizations who 15 years ago really made an effort for plan giving, and then maybe 10 years ago for major gifts. And today they're in a much better place than they were 10 years ago. because they focused on it and they stuck with it. And they knew that if they invested in it, they would reap the benefits later on. And that is the case for major gifts, and it's the case for planned giving. You've got to make the investment now and know that, okay, you're going to start to see the results in a couple of years, really start to see the results. And then from there, it's just going to continue to grow exponentially. And the reason I can say that is because I've been doing this a long time, and we've been tracking over the last 15 years those programs that started focusing on major gifts, and they're thriving now because they invested a long time ago in it.
I had a question
Mm-hmm.
early in the webinar. So what if donor interests diverge? In this case, long-term boomer donors aren't interested in seeing growth and transformation that interest the younger generations.
Okay. Well, the whole idea around major gifts and a lot of for mid-level, especially on tier A, is to find out what are the donor's passions and interests. That's your key. So if they no longer align with what you do, you know, well, you're not going to force them to do something they don't want to do. The key, though, is typically is that most nonprofits don't know their donors' passions and interests as it relates to everything you're doing. If you really knew the donor and you knew what they were passionate about, and you know your programs and you could bring them together, that's when the magic happens. That's when donors start to realize, oh, I didn't know that you did all of this. And I love this and I want to give more because I know it's going to make a difference. So that's what all this work about individual major gifts and mid-level is all about, trying to figure out your donors' passions and interests and all your programs, and you, the fundraiser, being the bridge that brings them together. That's what this is all about. That's what this work is. And if you could do that, even if that donor no longer wants you to, is no longer aligned, you could find them an organization that is aligned with them. That would be the best thing you could do for that donor. Why? Because that's being donor-centered.
And I think that's an interesting point, Jeff. Not necessarily letting the donors decide where you go with the organization, but finding a
No,
way to translate what you do in a way that makes the most sense for what the donor is
that's right.
passionate about.
That's right. And that's another area where nonprofits can go wrong because that money looks good. So somebody with a $5 million check says, hey, I know you're doing X, but I would love you to do Y. I'll give you 5 million to do it. The problem is when a nonprofit looks at that 5 million and feels like, well, maybe we can make it work. Well, it's not part of their mission. And too often nonprofits take the 5 million and then they get in trouble. The donor should not be driving your mission. The donor needs to be aligned with your mission. And if they're not, then there's something not right and they need to move on.
Looking through it, a question around, we had a whole bunch of older IRA, QCD donors. Some are giving they're giving at various levels. How much time do we focus on them? Would you want to comment on that, Jeff?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking just planned giving type donors in general who are giving. You definitely want to make sure that you have a planned giving program, that you have that you reach out to donors and find out if they put you in their estate, give them opportunities to do that and continue. And for those that you know that you are in their estate plans, continue to cultivate and steward them. The biggest problem that nonprofits have around the planned giving side is they have all of these donors that are in their planned giving society, but they never do anything with them. They sit there and maybe they do a lunch once a year or every 2 years to invite them to. 50% of donors that give a planned gift revoke that gift before they die. 50%, up to 50%.
Wow.
The way to stop that is to continue to steward them and spend time with them. So just as important with major gifts, that's why we have a plan for those that are tiered and tier them A, B, and C level, just like you would a major gift.
Speaking of touch points, got a touch point question. And just trying to just noodling how thinking about how to accomplish some of the 7 touches in the qualification process, filling out all 12 months of a bespoke communication plan for donors,
Yeah.
without having tools like robust impact reporting or events or other inside the organization. Hopefully I'm summarizing this question effectively, but lacking a lot of tools as many of us are, what are some good ways to create good touch points for our donors?
I think in that case, what I would do is look at what is your current direct response program communications team creating. Look at that for their whole year. What are they doing? Okay. And then from there, I would ask myself, well, how do I personalize this, for example, a newsletter or this online piece? How could I personalize it more so that it's talking directly to my donor? So that's how I would look at all of that to try to find you made a difference pieces. Get the program team to come up with a 1-page, hey, what are we doing these? What have we done in the last quarter? At least something to produce so they get in the habit that, if you're working on program, you got to report on what's actually happening. This is part of what you do. But that's where I would start. And then, there's thank you pieces that you would do, of course, throughout the year. And then you're looking at personal things like, what do you know about the donor, their anniversaries, their birthdays, different life cycles of how they're giving to you. Those are all personal touches you could send them. But that's where I would start first is what are you already producing? Take that, and then how could I personalize that to the donor? Like simple things like you're sending out an impact report, you could write a personal note on it. Same with a newsletter. Or if you're sending out an email or a certain newsletter via email, you can send it from your personal email address from work and write a little note with it. Those are all things you can start to do.
Great. Got a nice softball question, Jeff. If we have podcasts or other resources where we share our content on YouTube, elsewhere, do you want to talk about that? I got a link that I can drop in there.
Yeah. One of the things that Richard and I very early on when we started Veritas, we wanted to produce as much content as we could for free to help every size nonprofit. And so over the years, that's what we've done. And, we've written blogs, ongoing, we write a blog. We've got over 25 white papers. We've written 2 books. We do a podcast, all in the effort. And this is almost all free to you. You just go on our website at veritasgroup.com and there's a resources section. And there's all kinds of free resources almost on every subject around mid and major gifts. We've been writing a blog since 2011. And we have thousands of blog posts on all these different types of topics. And we've got white papers. So if you wanted to take all of our white papers and print them out and want to know how to do a major gift program or a mid-level program, you could do it if you just did all of that. And we did that on purpose because not everyone can afford a course or do our consulting, and that's okay. We wanted everyone to be able to understand the Veritas way and to implement it because we know after doing this for so many years that discipline, focus, and structure is so important because then it allows you to build those authentic relationships with your donors. We know this. We've done it over and over again. And so that's why we feel so strongly about it and know that it'll work for you. So, but we'd love to have you on as a first step. Take our course this course has been life-changing for so many fundraisers. When I go to a conference, I have people come up to me saying, I took that certification course and it changed my career. It changed how I looked at donors. It made me want to be a better fundraiser, and it gave me the tools that I needed to actually do the work in a much easier and better way. And, it happens over and over again when I walk down the hall of a conference. And it's very humbling, and it's also overwhelming, but it's also inspiring to know that so many people have been able to be helped through these courses. So it's been awesome, Matt.
I love it. I love it. Jeff, one last sort of specific question around the managers and executives course. Is that, would that be a good course for someone trying to looking at a transition from a major gift role into executive leadership?
It'd be perfect, because there's differences between being the frontline fundraiser and the manager of a frontline fundraiser, or even if you're a nonprofit leader. So some of you might have leaders that just don't get it. This would be the best course for them. In fact, we've had many leaders take that certification course for the executives, and it's changed how they view fundraising and how they resource major gifts and mid-level. It's a game changer for them. So definitely that would be a great thing. So I want to thank all of you today for being with us. And as a reminder, you're going to receive a recording of this webinar and slide deck later today or tomorrow morning, I think. So to register for our upcoming session of the certification courses for major gift fundraisers and fundraising leaders, visit us at veritasgroup.com/courses and use that code GIFTS2024 APR at checkout to get the $200 off when you sign up by next Friday. And as always, we are available to assist you with any questions by mail at academy@veritasgroup.com. We hope to see you in our upcoming course, and take care. And Matt, thanks for being with me. This is fun. This will be the first of many that we get to do together.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Jeff.
All right. We'll see you.